point in time that an old school friend came back into his life, Peter Wright, and they developed a very long-standing 50-50 partnership.
Mr. Hancock has got the most driving imagination that I've ever met. He comes up with more imaginative ideas than any other person I've ever met. On the other hand, they're not all workable, in my view anyhow, workable ideas. In fact, some of them have been proved not to be workable.
Well, Lang was a dreamer and Peter Wright was a realist. And I think Lang was outlandish and brazen in his statements. There wasn't an ounce of politics in his body, and I say that with great respect, by them. And rather than the odd couple, they were a perfect couple. Because Lang had all the let's rip and tear and let's get into it attitude, whereas Peter Wright was prepared to sit back, let matters take its course. So they were a great partnership.
Lang moved into the white asbestos mining at Nunyerry, and it was while he was there actually that he met and married his wife, Hope Hancock.
I personally came to know Lang because his property was on what we call the tableland, which was inland from ours. Mum and Dad were great recorders of history, because Dad's still camera and Mum's movie camera. Lang was very smart engineering-wise, and he made all the equipment himself, from bits of old 44-gallon drum and bits of old pipe and fencing wire and star posts here and there, and he did an amazing job with developing that mine. The house in which Lang and Hope lived when they were first married was very small. It resembled dongas put together. In other words, it wasn't a lavish establishment. Mum admired Hopey greatly and considered her one of her very close friends. I can remember when Hopey was pregnant, we were down from the station, and I remember Hope saying to Mum, I know that if it is a boy, that he will be called George Langley. If it's a girl, I've got no idea what we'd like to call the baby. I thought for a minute and I said, well, if you were going to call a boy George Langley, why wouldn't you call a girl Georgina Hope? And she laughed and said, Tish, that's a good idea. I'll have to run that past little Lang. And when the baby was born, Georgina Hope arrived, and much to the delight of everybody.
We didn't think that we would ever have a family, and when Georgina came along, we were very, very thankful to have Georgina. And I wouldn't like to see her replaced with a son, and I don't regret the fact that we haven't any sons by any manner of means.
They would be at Nunyerry half of the year. The weather ruled out mining for the rest of the year. So he was flying away to leave the mine, mothballed for the wet season, and he flew into this enormous storm.
In November of 1952, I was flying down south with my wife. By the time we got over the Hammersmith Ranges, the clouds had formed and the ceiling got lower and lower. I going through a gorge in the Turner, I noticed that the walls looked to me to be solid iron.
But, of course, just looking at it gets you absolutely nowhere. So he came back after the cyclone season, and there were no airports in the area, no roads, nothing. So he had to land his little Auster aircraft, a very frail machine indeed, in the Spinifex. He brought an axe to be able to chop down the trees, to be able to take off again, and sample bags, prospectus hammer, and over a series of weeks collected samples from over about 50 miles of this area.
It was very hard for Lang to convince anyone that he knew of enormous iron ore resources. And so he went to 20 different companies. And it wasn't until he got the head of Rio Tinto, a fellow called Duncan, from the UK, that he was able to convince people that it actually existed. But what he was able to do was say, look, all I want is 2.5% royalty on anything that you export. This deal was unprecedented. It was a massive amount of money that was involved, enormous amounts of wealth, and 2.5% of all of that wealth going in royalties to Hancock and Wright.
Kaiser, the minority partner, said in print, without Lang Hancock, there would be no Hammersley Iron.
Yours sincerely, L.G. Hancock.
Does that mean he was honoured in government, the media, others? Of course not.
There was a kind of an event to celebrate this, and there were the speeches and all the rest of it.
Of course, all this corporate backslapping and political euphoria further overshadowed the part played by Hancock, who was invited to their official opening, and all but ignored. It must have hurt.
Lang finished up being royalty rich, but he didn't own a mine. And Lang was never able to get the big financiers to the table.
He actually got his money, dumped it in holes in the ground. And that's what he did.
Here they are investigating another new site, which field engineer Ken McCamey first spotted from the air with Hancock.
He'd get so excited with his exploring and finding more and discoveries that he'd sometimes, well, at the time, get away from him. And so we'd hear going around the station home, so that meant Dad was coming back, it was dark. So we already had tins along both sides of the airstrip for these events, and Mother and I would have to go around and light up the kerosene that was in the tins so Dad would be able to see to land. He was always trying to do that little bit more, to go from just being a royalty person to a part owner. He just kept working through his adult life to try to build up towards, being able to be an owner-operator. That's the way he wished to spend his life. A lot of people would not choose it, but it's a life that he chose.
Lang had been grooming Gina from a very young age. Lang's view on that was just that it was the natural course of events.
As she gets older, she'll have a lot of responsibilities to undertake, and with no brothers, being an only child, everything will devolve upon her, so it's most necessary to get her a balanced education, a balanced outlook, so that she can learn to live and handle other people, as she will have to do.
Gina was sent to St Hilda's School in Perth as a young girl. She was a weekly boarder, a lot